The storm hit harder than anyone in Humboldt, Nevada, had predicted, turning the December afternoon of 1882 into a white nightmare that swallowed the landscape whole. Jessica Thompson's fingers had gone numb an hour ago, and now she could barely feel the reins in her hands as her mare stumbled through the deepening drifts toward what should have been a simple river crossing. The animal whinnied in distress, steam rising from her flanks as she balked at the edge where churning water met ice and snow in a treacherous mix that promised death to anyone foolish enough to attempt passage. Jessica had left her sister's homestead that morning with clear skies overhead and confidence in her ability to make the 2-day journey back to Carson City before any weather turned. She had been wrong. The blizzard descended with the fury of something personal, and now she sat stranded at the Humboldt River crossing with darkness approaching, and her body starting to shake with cold that went deeper than her bones. She tried urging the mare forward again, but the animal had more sense than pride. The water rushed past, black and deadly beneath chunks of ice that spun and collided like weapons. Jessica's vision blurred with snow and tears of frustration. She had made this crossing a dozen times, but never like this. Never with visibility reduced to a few feet and ice forming on her eyelashes, and the certain knowledge that if she stayed here much longer, they would find her frozen body come spring. Then through the white curtain came a figure on horseback, solid and dark against the pale world. Jessica blinked hard, afraid her mind was playing desperate tricks, but the rider drew closer and resolved into a man bundled in a heavy coat with a scarf wrapped around the lower half of his face. His horse moved with confidence through the snow, and as he approached, she saw eyes the color of slate watching her with sharp assessment. "You cannot cross here," he called out over the wind, his voice deep and carrying authority. "The river's running too fast and the ice is breaking up." "I can see that," Jessica shouted back, trying to keep the tremor of cold and fear from her voice. "But I cannot stay here either." The cowboy brought his horse alongside hers, and she could see more of him now. Young, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair visible beneath his hat and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. His eyes studied her with an intensity that made her feel exposed despite her layers of clothing. "There's a shallow crossing upstream about a mile," he said. "The trees break the wind there and the water spreads wide. It's passable if we're careful. I'll take you across." "I don't even know you," Jessica said, though the protest was weak even to her own ears. What choice did she have? Name's Warren Jenkins. "I've got a cabin about 3 miles north of the crossing. You won't make it anywhere else before full dark, and this storm's only getting worse. I can see you across and give you shelter until it passes." Jessica looked into his face and saw nothing but genuine concern. Her instincts, usually reliable, told her to trust him. The alternative was freezing to death in the next few hours. "Jessica Thompson," she said, "and I would be grateful for your help." Warren nodded and turned his horse. "Stay close behind me. Your mare's already spooked, so keep her calm. The water's cold enough to kill in minutes if either of us goes in." They moved upstream through snow that reached the horses' chests in places. Jessica focused on the broad back ahead of her, on keeping her mare moving in Warren's wake. Her hands ached with cold, and she had stopped feeling her feet entirely. The wind screamed around them, throwing snow into her face until she had to squint against the assault. When they reached the crossing, she saw he had been right. The river spread wider here, the current less violent, though still dangerous. Ice clung to rocks and branches along the edges, and the water looked black and bottomless. Warren turned to look at her. "I'm going to cross first so you can see the path. There's rocks beneath that make it shallower, but you have to know where they are. Watch where I go and follow exactly. Understand?" Jessica nodded, not trusting her voice. She watched as Warren urged his horse into the water. The animal tensed but obeyed, stepping carefully into the current. The water rose to its chest, and Jessica's heart clenched with fear, but Warren kept moving with steady confidence. He picked his way across, angling upstream slightly to compensate for the current, until he reached the far bank and turned back to face her. "Come on," he called. "You can do this." Jessica took a breath that hurt her lungs with its cold and nudged her mare forward. The horse resisted, and for a terrible moment she thought the animal would refuse entirely, but then they were in the water and the shock of it made Jessica gasp. Even through her boots she could feel the deadly cold. The current pulled at them immediately, and her mare scrambled for footing on the rocky bottom. "Keep her head up," Warren shouted. "Angle left, there's a drop off to your right." Jessica obeyed, trusting him because she had no other choice. The mare lunged through the water, fighting the current with every step. Jessica leaned forward, trying to help with balance, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Water splashed up, soaking her skirts, and the cold was indescribable. Then they were climbing up the far bank, and Warren was there, catching her mare's bridle and helping pull them up onto solid ground. Jessica's whole body shook violently now, and her teeth chattered so hard she bit her tongue. "We need to move fast," Warren said, his face grim. "You're soaked and the temperature's dropping. My cabin's close." He set a hard pace, and Jessica clung to her saddle and followed. The world had become nothing but white and cold and the dark shape of the man ahead of her. Time lost meaning. She might have been riding for minutes or hours when suddenly there were trees thick around them, and then a clearing with a cabin solid and real against the storm. Warren dismounted quickly and came to her side. "Can you get down?" Jessica tried, but her legs had no strength. She started to slide from the saddle, and Warren caught her, his arms strong as he lifted her and carried her toward the cabin. She wanted to protest that she could walk, but her body refused to cooperate. Inside, the cabin was dim but mercifully sheltered from the wind. Warren set her on her feet near a cold stove and immediately began building a fire, his movements quick and efficient. Jessica stood swaying, watching him work, unable to form coherent thoughts beyond the desperate need for warmth. "You need to get those wet clothes off," Warren said as flames caught and began to spread through the kindling. "There's a blanket on the bed. Wrap yourself in that while I get this fire going properly." "I cannot." Jessica's voice came out slurred, her lips numb. "Too cold." Warren looked at her sharply, then seemed to make a decision. He stood and went to the bed, grabbing 2 heavy blankets. "I'm going to help you then, and I apologize for the impropriety, but frostbite and death are worse than damaged modesty." He helped her peel off her soaked coat and dress, his hands impersonal and efficient as a doctor's. Jessica's mind felt foggy and slow, but she registered somewhere that he kept his eyes averted as much as possible, that he wrapped the blankets around her the moment her wet clothes were removed. He guided her to sit close to the stove, which now radiated blessed heat. "Stay here," he said. "I need to tend the horses." He was gone for what felt like a long time. Jessica sat huddled in the blankets, slowly becoming aware of painful tingling in her hands and feet as circulation returned. The cabin was simple but well built, with a solid floor and tight walls. A bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, shelves with supplies, hooks for hanging gear. Everything neat and organized, the space of a man who lived alone but took pride in his surroundings. When Warren returned, he was covered in snow and his face was red with cold. He shrugged out of his heavy coat and boots and came to crouch beside her. "Let me see your hands." Jessica extended them, and he took them carefully in his own larger ones, examining her fingers. His hands were warm now, calloused and strong, He touched her fingertips gently, watching her face. "Can you feel that?" "Yes," she whispered. "It hurts." "Good. Pain means no permanent damage." He released her hands and moved to check her feet, his touch just as gentle and careful. Satisfied, he stood. "You were lucky. Another hour and you would have lost fingers or toes, or your life." "Thank you," Jessica said, and her voice broke slightly. "If you had not found me, I would have tried that crossing and drowned." Warren's expression softened. "The storm came on sudden. No one could have predicted it would hit so hard. You planning to explain what you were doing out here alone?" "I was visiting my sister. She married a rancher northeast of here. I left this morning to head back to Carson City where I work as a school teacher. The sky was clear." "And you traveled alone?" There was something in his voice, not quite disapproval but close. "I have made the journey several times. I am quite capable." Even cold and wrapped in blankets, Jessica felt the need to defend herself. Warren held up a hand. "I'm not questioning your capability. Just noting that the territory is hard country, especially this time of year." He moved to his supplies and began pulling out food. "Are you hungry?" Jessica's stomach answered for her with a loud growl that made Warren smile, and she saw his whole face transform with it. Without the grimness of fighting the storm, he was handsome in a rough, honest way that made something flutter in her chest despite the circumstances. "I will take that as a yes," he said, and began preparing a meal. As warmth seeped back into her body and the smell of cooking filled the cabin, Jessica watched Warren move around his space. He worked with quiet competence, occasionally glancing over to check on her. The storm raged outside, rattling the shutters and howling around the corners of the cabin, but inside was warm and safe and unexpectedly peaceful. "How long have you lived here?" Jessica asked. 3 years. Saved up working cattle drives and bought the land. I run some horses, do some trapping in winter, pick up work at the ranches when they need extra hands. It's a simple life, but it's mine. No family." Something flickered across his face. "My parents died of fever when I was 18. Had a brother, but he headed to California looking for gold, and I have not heard from him in 4 years. I learned early that in the end, you can only really count on yourself." The loneliness in those words struck Jessica deeply. She knew something about being alone. Her own parents had died when she was young, and she had been raised by an aunt who viewed her as an obligation. Her sister was 7 years older and had married young, leaving Jessica to make her own way. Teaching gave her purpose and independence, but long winter evenings in her boarding house room could feel endless. Warren brought her a plate of beans and salt pork with hardtack softened in the bean liquid. It was simple food, but to Jessica it tasted like the finest meal she had ever eaten. She ate with desperate hunger, and Warren watched with satisfaction. "When did you last eat?" "Early this morning, before I left my sister's place." He shook his head and refilled her plate without asking. When she had finished, he made coffee strong and hot, and they sat in companionable silence drinking it while the storm continued its assault on the world outside. "How long do you think the storm will last?" Jessica asked finally. "Hard to say. Could blow through by morning, could last 3 days. Either way, you will not be traveling until it clears and I can see the trail. These storms can be killers even after they pass, with drifts deep enough to swallow a horse." The implication settled over her. She would be staying here in this one-room cabin with this man she had met only hours ago. The impropriety of it should have scandalized her, but Jessica found she could not bring herself to care. The alternative had been death, and Warren had shown nothing but respectful kindness. "I will sleep on the floor," Warren said, as if reading her thoughts. "You take the bed. It's not much, but the mattress is decent. I cannot put you out of your own bed. You can and you will. I have slept in far worse places, believe me. A bedroll by the stove is luxury compared to some camps I have known." His tone left no room for argument. Jessica nodded, exhaustion suddenly crashing over her. The warmth and food and safety had unlocked something, and now she could barely keep her eyes open. Warren set up his bedroll with practiced efficiency, then banked the fire for the night. "If you need anything, wake me. That fire needs tending every few hours anyway." Jessica made her way to the bed and lay down, still wrapped in the blankets. The mattress was filled with straw and surprisingly comfortable. She thought she would lie awake, hyper-aware of the man sleeping just feet away, but sleep took her almost instantly. She woke once in the deep darkness of night to see Warren crouched by the stove, adding wood. The firelight played across his features, highlighting the strong bones of his face, the breadth of his shoulders. He glanced over and their eyes met across the dim cabin. Neither spoke, but something passed between them in that moment, some acknowledgement of the strange intimacy of this situation. Then Jessica let her eyes drift closed again and fell back into dreams. Morning came gray and muted. The storm had diminished but not stopped, snow still falling steadily outside. Jessica woke to find Warren already up, the cabin warm and coffee brewing. Her dress and undergarments were hanging near the stove, steam rising from them. "I figured you would want your clothes dried," Warren said, his back to her as he tended something on the stove. "They should be ready soon." Jessica clutched the blanket around herself and sat up. "Thank you. That was thoughtful. There's water in the basin if you want to wash. I will step outside and check on the horses while you dress." He pulled on his coat and left before she could respond, giving her privacy without making it awkward. Jessica stood and stretched, feeling the stiffness in her muscles from yesterday's ordeal. She washed quickly in the cold water, then dressed in her now dry clothes. The dress was wrinkled and showed signs of hard wear, but it was clean and warm. When Warren returned, stamping snow from his boots, he found her braiding her dark hair by the stove. "The storm should clear by evening," he said. "But the drifts are deep. It will be at least tomorrow before travel is safe, maybe longer." Jessica nodded, trying to ignore the small flutter of what might have been relief. "I should send word to my sister and to the school. They will worry." "No way to do that until the storm passes and we can reach town. Your sister will know you took shelter somewhere. Anyone with sense would." He was right, of course. Jessica settled into the strange reality of being snowbound with a stranger who no longer felt quite so strange. They fell into an easy routine as the day progressed. Warren had work to do, even trapped in the cabin. He repaired tack, sharpened his knife, cleaned his rifle. Jessica found a book on his shelf, a worn copy of James Fenimore Cooper, and read while the storm gradually exhausted itself outside. They talked in fits and starts, sharing stories. Jessica told him about teaching, about the children she worked with, about the satisfaction of watching a student's face light up with understanding. Warren spoke of horses and the land, of hard winters and brief summers, of the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. "Why teaching?" Warren asked at one point, looking up from the leather strap he was mending. "Because someone taught me," Jessica said simply. "My aunt had no patience for education, thought it a waste for a girl. But there was a teacher in the town where we lived, Mrs. Patterson. She let me come to the schoolhouse after hours and taught me everything. Mathematics, literature, history, geography. She opened the whole world to me." Jessica paused, remembering. "She died when I was 16, and I promised myself I would do for other children what she did for me." "That's a good reason," Warren said quietly. "Better than most people have for what they do. What about you? Why this life out here alone?" Warren was silent for a long moment, his hand still on the leather. "I tried living in towns. Worked in a mercantile in Sacramento for a year after my parents died. Felt like I was suffocating, all those walls and people and noise. Out here, I can breathe. I can see the sky and know the weather by the smell of the air. I answer to no one but myself and God. Maybe it's lonely sometimes, but it's honest. I prefer honest to comfortable." Jessica understood that in a way she had not expected to. She had chosen teaching partly for the independence it gave her, the ability to support herself without relying on a husband or family. In her own way, she had chosen freedom too. The storm broke near sunset, the clouds tearing apart to reveal a sky going pink and gold in the west. Warren opened the door and they stood together looking out at a world transformed. Snow lay in drifts that reached halfway up the cabin walls in places, sculpted by wind into fantastic shapes. The trees were heavy with it, branches bowed, and everything glittered in the dying light. "It's beautiful," Jessica breathed. "It's deadly," Warren said, but his voice held appreciation too. "But yes, it's beautiful. The land is hard but fair. It will kill you if you do not respect it, but it rewards those who do." They ate dinner as darkness fell, the sky clearing to reveal stars so bright and numerous they looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. The temperature was dropping fast, the cold seeping in around the door and windows despite Warren's good construction. "It will be bitter tonight," Warren said, adding extra wood to the stove. "Tomorrow should be clear, though. I will ride out at first light and check the trails. If they are passable, I can guide you to town the day after." The thought of leaving brought an unexpected pang. Jessica looked around the cabin that had become oddly familiar in just a day and a half, at the man who had saved her life and asked nothing in return. She realized she did not want to leave, not yet, and the strength of that feeling surprised her. "Tell me about the horses you raise," she said instead of acknowledging his statement, and Warren's face lit up as he began to describe his small herd, his plans for breeding, his dreams of building a reputation for quality animals. Jessica listened and watched him in the firelight and felt something shift inside her chest, something warm and terrifying and exhilarating all at once. She barely knew this man, and yet she felt more comfortable with him than she had with people she had known for years. There was a rightness to being here that defied logic. The night deepened and conversation eventually wound down. Warren set up his bedroll again and Jessica retreated to the bed, but sleep proved elusive. She lay in the darkness listening to Warren's steady breathing and the pop and crackle of the fire, her mind churning with thoughts she had no business thinking. Tomorrow, he would check the trails. The day after, she would return to her life, and Warren would return to his, and they would likely never see each other again. The thought felt wrong, like losing something precious she had only just discovered. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke to the gray light of pre-dawn and the sound of Warren moving around the cabin. He was dressed for riding, pulling on his heavy coat. "I will be back by midday," he said quietly when he saw she was awake. "There is food and coffee. Keep the fire going. If anything happens, the rifle is loaded and there's extra shells on the shelf." "Be careful," Jessica said, and meant it with an intensity that surprised her. Something flickered in Warren's eyes, but he just nodded and left. Jessica heard him leading his horse out, heard the crunch of snow under hooves, and then silence. The cabin felt enormous and empty without him. Jessica got up and went through the motions of making coffee and eating a simple breakfast, but her mind was elsewhere. She found herself drawn to the small details of Warren's life scattered around the cabin. A tintype of a severe-looking couple who must have been his parents. A harmonica on the shelf. Books, more than she would have expected, their spines cracked from repeated reading. Everything spoke of a man who had built a life of purpose and solitude, who had asked for little and expected less. She was cleaning up from breakfast when she heard the sound of an approaching horse. But it was too early for Warren to be back, and the rhythm of the hoofbeats was wrong, faster and more urgent. Jessica moved to the window and looked out to see a rider approaching the cabin, swaying in the saddle. She grabbed the rifle without thinking, checking that it was loaded as Warren had indicated, then went to the door. The rider was close now, and she could see it was a man, young, with blood darkening the front of his coat. He saw her and raised one hand in a gesture that might have been greeting or plea. "Help," he called out, his voice weak. "Please." Jessica's mind raced. Warren had said to be careful, that the territory was dangerous, but this man was clearly hurt and in need. She could not just let him die. She set the rifle aside but kept it close as she opened the door and stepped out into the brutal cold. The man half fell from his horse, and Jessica moved to help support him. He was older than she had first thought, maybe 30, with a lean face and frightened eyes. Blood seeped from a wound in his side. "What happened?" Jessica asked as she helped him toward the cabin. "Robbery," the man gasped. "3 men. Took my gear, my money, shot me when I fought back. I have been riding for hours, saw the smoke from your chimney." Jessica got him inside and helped him to a chair. The wound was in his left side, still bleeding sluggishly. She had some experience with injuries from her years teaching, children with cuts and breaks, but nothing like this. "I need to stop the bleeding," she said, trying to sound calm. "And we need to get you out of that coat." The man nodded, his face pale. Jessica helped him remove the coat and then his shirt, revealing the bullet wound. It was not as bad as she had feared. The bullet had cut a groove along his ribs but did not appear to have gone deep. She boiled water and found clean cloth, then cleaned and bound the wound as best she could. The man, who said his name was Thomas, gritted his teeth but did not cry out. "You are lucky," Jessica said as she worked. "A few inches over and you would be dead." "I know," Thomas said. "I have been praying the whole ride. Then I saw your cabin like an answer." Jessica had just finished binding the wound when she heard another horse outside. She tensed, suddenly aware of how vulnerable they were, but then recognized the rhythm of the hoofbeats. Warren. He came through the door and stopped short, taking in the scene. His eyes went to Jessica first, checking that she was unharmed, then to Thomas in the chair and the bloody cloth on the table. "What happened?" His voice was hard, controlled. Jessica explained quickly while Warren listened, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he moved to examine Thomas himself, checking the wound and the bandaging. "She did good work," Warren said finally. "You will heal if infection does not set in. You said 3 men." Thomas nodded and described them as best he could. Warren's jaw tightened. "I know who you are talking about, the Dawson brothers and their cousin. They have been causing trouble in the territory for months. Law has been looking for them." He looked at Thomas. "You're lucky they did not kill you outright. They have before." "What should we do?" Jessica asked. "Get him to the sheriff in Humboldt. The storm has passed and the trails should be manageable now. I will take him in." Warren looked at Jessica, and something complicated passed across his face. "I will take you both in. You can catch the stage to Carson City from there." Jessica nodded, though her heart sank. Of course. This was the practical solution, the right thing to do. Thomas needed a doctor and the law needed to be told about the Dawson brothers. And she needed to get back to her life. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Thomas rested while Warren and Jessica packed supplies and got the horses ready. The work gave them little time to talk, and when they did, it was practical discussion of the journey ahead. But Jessica felt Warren's eyes on her more than once, and when she looked up, she found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. They set out at first light the next morning, Thomas on his horse with Warren leading and Jessica following behind. The world was still and white and beautiful, the sky a clear hard blue. The cold was intense but bearable with layers and scarves. They moved slowly, Warren picking his way through drifts and around obstacles, leading them steadily toward town. It took most of the day. Thomas held up better than Jessica expected, though by afternoon his face was gray with pain and exhaustion. Warren called frequent stops to rest the horses and check on their passenger, always patient, always careful. They reached Humboldt as the sun was setting, the town looking small and huddled against the snow. Warren took them straight to the sheriff's office, where a weathered man with a badge listened to Thomas's story with sharp attention. "I will get a posse together at first light," the sheriff said. "Those Dawson boys have been a plague. Time to end it." He looked at Warren. "You know tracking. I could use you." Warren hesitated, and Jessica saw him glance at her. "I have obligations." "Miss Thompson needs to catch the stage to Carson City," Jessica said, though the words felt like stones in her throat. "I am sure the sheriff needs all the help he can get with dangerous men like that." The sheriff nodded. "Stage leaves day after tomorrow. Gives us time to catch those boys and get back." Warren looked at Jessica for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, I will ride with you." The sheriff arranged for Thomas to be taken to the doctor, and for Jessica to have a room at the boarding house. Warren walked with her through the darkening streets, leading their horses. Neither spoke until they reached the boarding house. "I will see you before you leave," Warren said finally. "Make sure you get off safely." "You do not have to do that. I am perfectly capable of boarding a stage by myself." "I know you are." Warren's voice was soft. "But I want to." Their eyes met and held. Jessica felt her breath catch. In the lamplight from the boarding house windows, Warren's face was all shadows and angles, his eyes dark and intense. She wanted to say something, anything, to express the tangle of feelings in her chest, but the words would not come. "Be safe," she said instead. "Those men are dangerous. I will." Warren reached out as if to touch her face, then seemed to think better of it and dropped his hand. "Get some rest. You have earned it." He turned and walked away before she could respond, leading the horses toward the livery. Jessica watched until he disappeared into the darkness, then went inside with her heart aching in a way she had never experienced before. The next day passed with agonizing slowness. Jessica helped the boarding house keeper with chores, wandered the small town, tried to read. But her mind was elsewhere, with Warren and the posse somewhere out in the snowy wilderness chasing dangerous men. She had known him only a handful of days, yet the thought of something happening to him made her feel sick with dread. She retired early, unable to bear the concerned looks from the other boarders who had learned her story. But sleep would not come. She lay in the narrow bed staring at the ceiling, trying to imagine going back to Carson City, to her small room and her classroom and her solitary life. It had been enough before. Why did it feel like a prison now? Dawn came gray and cold. Jessica dressed and went downstairs to find the boarding house keeper already up, making breakfast. "Posse came back in the night," the woman said. "Got the Dawson boys without a shot fired. They are in jail waiting for the circuit judge." Relief flooded through Jessica so powerfully she had to grip the table for support. "Was anyone hurt?" "Not a scratch, I heard. That Warren Jenkins knows his business, apparently. Led them right to where those boys were holed up." Jessica ate breakfast without tasting it, then returned to her room to pack her few belongings. The stage would leave at noon. In a few hours, she would be gone, and this strange interlude would be over. She would go back to her life, and Warren would go back to his, and that would be that. She was fastening her bag when she heard voices downstairs. Her heart leaped at the sound of Warren's voice, low and distinctive. She checked her reflection quickly, smoothed her hair, then forced herself to walk slowly down the stairs. Warren stood in the front hall talking with the boarding house keeper. He had cleaned up but looked tired, lines of exhaustion around his eyes. When he saw Jessica, his whole face changed, softening in a way that made her chest tight. "Miss Thompson," he said formally, aware of their audience. "I wanted to make sure you were well before your journey." "I am fine, thank you. I heard the posse was successful. Congratulations. Just doing what needed doing." Warren glanced at the boarding house keeper, then back at Jessica. "Might I have a word with you, privately?" The keeper smiled knowingly and bustled away. Jessica led Warren into the small parlor, her hands trembling slightly. They stood facing each other in the empty room, and suddenly all the careful words Jessica had been rehearsing fled her mind. "I cannot stop thinking about you," Warren said bluntly, his eyes locked on hers. "I know we have only known each other a few days. I know you have a life in Carson City, a career you love. But I cannot let you leave without telling you that these past days have meant something to me." "You have meant something to me." Jessica's heart hammered against her ribs. "Warren, let me finish," he said, taking a step closer. "I am not a man of means. I have a cabin and some land and horses, and I work hard for every dollar. I cannot offer you an easy life or society or culture. But I can offer you a good life, an honest life, and I can promise that I will spend every day trying to make you happy if you will give me the chance." Jessica stared at him, unable to quite believe what she was hearing. "Are you asking me to marry you? We barely know each other." "I know enough." Warren's voice was fierce now, passionate in a way she had not heard from him before. "I know you are brave and kind and smart. I know you do not need a man to take care of you, but that you might want one to stand beside you. I know that when I think about going back to my cabin without you, it feels empty in a way it never did before. If that is not enough to build on, tell me, and I will step back. But if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, then stay. Stay and let me court you properly. Stay and give us a chance." Jessica felt tears prick her eyes. Everything he was saying was mad, impossible, the opposite of sensible. She had worked too hard for her independence, her career, to throw it away for a man she had known less than a week. It went against every practical bone in her body. But her heart had no interest in practicality. Her heart remembered the feeling of being safe in his cabin while the storm raged outside. It remembered his gentleness as he checked her hands and feet for frostbite, his respect in giving her privacy, his competence and strength, and the loneliness she had glimpsed in him that matched her own. It remembered the way he looked at her like she was something precious and necessary. "I feel it," she whispered. "I feel it, and it terrifies me because it makes no sense. The best things rarely do." Warren reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hands in his. His grip was warm and solid and sure. "I am not asking you to give up teaching. Humboldt needs a teacher. The school here lost theirs last month when she married and moved away. You could have that position if you wanted it. You would be doing the same work, just in a different place. You checked on that." Jessica felt something warm bloom in her chest at the evidence of his thoughtfulness. "I checked on a lot of things while I was in town. I am not a man who does things halfway, Jessica. When I want something, I pursue it fully, and I want you." Jessica looked into his eyes and saw complete sincerity there and something more. She saw possibility. Not a guarantee of happiness or an easy road, but the chance to build something real with someone who saw her as an equal, who respected her strength but offered his own. The chance to have both independence and partnership. "I must be insane," she said, but she was smiling. "But yes, I will stay. Yes, I want to see where this leads." Warren's face transformed with a smile so bright it made him look years younger. He pulled her close, wrapping her in his arms, and Jessica let herself lean into his strength. She felt his heart beating against hers, felt the solid reality of him, and knew with sudden certainty that she was making the right choice, no matter how improbable. "We should probably tell the stage driver I will not be traveling," Jessica said, her voice muffled against Warren's chest. "Probably," Warren agreed, but made no move to release her. They stood holding each other in the parlor, while the morning sun streamed through the windows and painted everything gold. The months that followed were a whirlwind of change and challenge and unexpected joy. Jessica took the teaching position in Humboldt, moving into a room at the boarding house while Warren courted her with old-fashioned determination. He came to town every weekend, bringing her small gifts: wildflowers in spring, a book he thought she would like, a wooden box he had carved himself. They took long walks and talked about everything, learning each other in the way people do when they are building a foundation to last a lifetime. The town watched with interest and approval. Jessica's teaching won over the parents and students quickly, her dedication and skill obvious. Warren's quiet competence and integrity had already earned him respect in the community. Together, they made sense in a way that defied the short time they had known each other. They were married in June in the small church in Humboldt, with half the town in attendance. Jessica wore a simple dress of blue calico that Warren said matched her eyes, and Warren wore his best suit that he had owned since his parents' funeral. The ceremony was brief, the reception joyful, and when Warren took Jessica home to the cabin that evening, it felt like coming home in the truest sense. Jessica continued teaching through the following school year, riding into town each day from the cabin. It was a hard schedule, but she had always been willing to work hard for things that mattered, and Warren was worth it. Coming home each evening to find him working on the land, having dinner together while they talked about their days, falling asleep in his arms each night, these were riches beyond anything she had imagined for herself. Their life fell into rhythms as the seasons turned. Warren built additions to the cabin, creating more space for them and the future he hoped they would build. Jessica transformed the simple bachelor quarters into a real home, adding curtains and books and all the small touches that made a place lived in and loved. They worked side by side, learning each other's strengths and weaknesses, building trust through shared labor and shared dreams. When Jessica discovered she was pregnant the following spring, Warren's joy was so profound, it brought tears to his eyes. He became even more protective, though he was careful not to smother her independence. He understood that she needed to continue teaching, that her work mattered to her, and so he made sure she had everything she needed to keep doing it safely. Their daughter was born in December, almost exactly 2 years after the blizzard that had brought them together. They named her Sarah, and she had Warren's dark hair and Jessica's blue eyes. Warren held her with such tender care that Jessica fell in love with him all over again, seeing this strong, capable man reduced to awestruck wonder by the tiny life they had created. Jessica took a few months away from teaching, then returned part-time, bringing Sarah with her to the schoolhouse. The older students doted on the baby, and Jessica found that having her daughter there added warmth to the classroom. Warren built a cradle that lived in the corner of the schoolroom, and Sarah grew up surrounded by learning and laughter. 3 years later, their son was born. They named him James, after Warren's father, and he was a solid, serious baby who watched everything with thoughtful eyes. Now, Warren had to expand the cabin further, building rooms for each child and a larger living space for their growing family. The years passed with the kind of contentment that comes from building something meaningful. There were hard times, certainly. Winters when supplies ran low and sickness threatened. Seasons when the income from Warren's horses was not enough and they had to make difficult choices. Moments of disagreement and frustration as any married couple faces. But through it all, they had each other, and that foundation they had built in those first days proved unshakable. Jessica eventually became the head teacher in Humboldt, training new teachers and developing curriculum for the whole region. Warren's reputation for breeding quality horses spread, and he began to prosper in ways he had never imagined. They saved carefully, invested wisely, and slowly built a level of financial security that gave them freedom and options. On their 10th anniversary, Warren took Jessica back to the spot where he had first found her at the river crossing. It was summer now, the water running clear and gentle, nothing like the deadly rush of that winter storm. They stood hand in hand looking at the place where their story had begun. "You ever regret it?" Warren asked quietly. "The life you might have had if you had gone back to Carson City?" Jessica turned to look at him, at this man who had saved her life and then given her a new one richer than anything she could have planned. She saw the silver beginning to thread through his dark hair, the lines around his eyes from squinting into sun and wind, the strength that had only deepened with the years. She thought of their home, their children, the community they had built, the love that had grown from that improbable beginning into something vast and enduring. "Not for a single moment," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "You gave me more than rescue that day. You gave me a real life, a full life, a life I did not even know I was missing until I found it." Warren pulled her close and kissed her, and Jessica kissed him back with the passion and commitment of a decade of shared life and the promise of decades more to come. Around them, the summer breeze whispered through the grass, and the river sang its eternal song, and everything was exactly as it should be. Their children grew strong and healthy. Sarah inherited her mother's love of learning and her father's connection to the land, becoming a teacher herself while helping Warren with the horses. James proved to have a gift for working with animals that surpassed even his father's, taking over more of the breeding operation as he got older and bringing new ideas that expanded their success. When they became grandparents, Warren and Jessica found new joy in watching their children build their own families and lives. They stayed in the cabin that had started as a simple bachelor quarters and had grown into a sprawling home full of life and love. The property expanded as well, with Sarah and her husband building a house on the western edge, and James building on the eastern edge, creating a family compound that spanned generations. On warm evenings, they would all gather at the original cabin, now the grandparents' house, and share meals and stories. The grandchildren would beg Warren to tell again how he had found their grandmother stuck at the river crossing in the snow, and he would oblige with dramatic flair that made Jessica laugh and shake her head. But her eyes always grew soft when he reached the part about bringing her to the cabin, about knowing almost immediately that she was different, that she mattered. "I still remember how you looked standing there by the stove wrapped in those blankets," Warren would say, his hand finding Jessica's across the table. "Like you belonged there, like you had always belonged there, and I was just finally seeing you for the first time. And I remember thinking you were either going to save me, or I was going to freeze to death, and either way it was out of my hands," Jessica would reply. "I am very glad it turned out to be the former." The children and grandchildren would laugh, having heard these stories countless times but never tiring of them. These were their family legends, the stories that explained how they all came to be. Jessica taught until she was 65, finally retiring with the gratitude of an entire community that she had served faithfully for over 4 decades. The school held a ceremony in her honor, with former students coming from across the territory to pay tribute. Warren sat in the front row, his eyes bright with pride, holding her hand. They entered their retirement years with the same partnership that had defined their marriage. They traveled some, visiting family and seeing parts of the country they had never explored. But they always came home to the cabin and the land, to the place where their story had begun and where it would end. On their 50th anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration that lasted 3 days. There were children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren now, a testament to what had grown from that chance meeting in a blizzard. Warren and Jessica stood at the center of it all, aged now but still strong, still clearly in love after half a century together. 50 years, Jessica said as they danced slowly to music played by their grandson on his fiddle. Who would have believed it that day at the river? I would have, Warren said firmly. From the moment I saw you, I knew you were going to change my life. I just did not know how much, or how grateful I would be for it every single day. You are a romantic, Warren Jenkins. You always have been, underneath that practical cowboy exterior. Only for you, Jessica Thompson Jenkins. Only ever for you. They danced until the stars came out, surrounded by the family they had built and the love that had sustained them through all the years. The next generation watched and learned, seeing what devotion looked like, what commitment meant, how love deepened rather than faded when it was tended with care and respect. Warren and Jessica lived into their 80s, still side by side, still devoted to each other and the life they had built. When Warren finally passed, it was peacefully in his sleep, in the bed he had shared with Jessica for over 50 years, in the cabin he had built with his own hands. Jessica held his hand as he slipped away, whispering her love and gratitude for the gift he had been to her. She followed him 2 years later, surrounded by children and grandchildren who had learned from her example what strength and grace looked like, what it meant to choose love and hold to it through everything life brought. Her last words were of Warren, saying she was ready to see him again, that she had been lonely without him. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the property, where they could see the river crossing where their story had begun. Their children put a single headstone for both of them, inscribed simply with their names, their years, and beneath, the words, "Love rescued from a storm built to last forever." The cabin stands still, maintained by their descendants, a landmark and a reminder. The story of the schoolteacher stuck at the river crossing and the cowboy who saved her has become legend in the family. Told and retold, the foundation story that explains where they all came from and what they are built on. The values Warren and Jessica lived by, the love they showed each other and their children, the way they built a life of meaning and purpose from nothing but determination and devotion. These things echo down through the generations. And sometimes, on snowy winter evenings, when the wind howls around the corners of the old cabin and the fire crackles on the hearth, the family swears they can feel the presence of their ancestors, still together, still watching over the legacy they created from one man's kindness and one woman's courage and the love that bloomed between them against all odds and lasted beyond death itself. Their story, born in a blizzard, proved warmer and more enduring than any storm, a testament to the power of choosing love when it finds you, no matter how improbable the circumstances or how uncertain the future. Warren and Jessica had taken that chance, had built their forever on a foundation laid in just a few days of crisis and connection, and it had been enough, more than enough. It had been everything.